Mr. Steve Bullock, who's running for Attorney General, is our first candidate. I want to welcome Steve.
Well, I very much appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you today. I didn't get quite through the door and someone said, "You must be a politician." The only thing that makes me feel a little bit better is I can never look as good as like Paul Tusk, the bear paw up there. So I don't think that, hopefully, that politicians and people that are vitally concerned about the nonprofit world, we shouldn't be that much different, even though sometimes we might dress a little bit different. I'm honored to be here today. It's interesting what the campaign trail can kind of do to people. You're not sure if you have a direct affinity or understanding of your audience. Case in point, 2 weeks ago I was up speaking in Missoula to the Collision Repair Organization, their annual meeting. And so sometimes it's really hard to make those direct ties to people. I feel a little bit more comfortable here because I think I can say, all political types will exaggerate a little bit, but I think I can say without too much hyperbole that I respect, appreciate, and understand the work that you do as an association, as well as a lot of the work that you do as individuals. I've had the good fortune for the last few years to serve on the Public Policy Council of the Montana Nonprofit Association. And it's been a wonderful experience in a lot of ways because it's a good, diverse group. And one of the things that's always critical and always important is that whatever philosophical differences people might have, things like that, they work it out and say, well, what's ultimately best for this sector? What's ultimately best for that big chunk of our economy and your organizations and entities? So I've had a great time working with that, making recommendations to your board of directors to ultimately adopt the agenda and positions on legislation as well. I'm not running for a seat on your board, though, so I guess I should talk a little bit about what I'm running for in the Attorney General's office, and I certainly will do my best to address Brian's questions. What I found in traveling from tow truck conventions to otherwise, though, is not that many people really have that firm of sense of what the Attorney General does and can do. And ultimately, a group like this should be vitally concerned, because as I'll talk a little bit more later, that we are one of the principal regulators of nonprofits and charitable trusts. There was a great quote, though, about 50 years ago from our Montana Supreme Court. And they said, as the chief law officer of the state, the Attorney General may, in the absence of some express legislative restriction to the contrary, exercise all such power and authority as public interests may from time to time require, and may institute, conduct, and maintain all such suits and proceedings as he deems necessary for the enforcement of the laws of the state, the preservation of the order, or the protection of rights. So what this says is a couple of things. Now, this is a 750 employee state agency. It can impact so many areas of our life. But at its base, it's not unlike what a lot of you do in your daily work, and that's promoting and protecting the public interest. The difference between what the Attorney General has, though, is it also says, you're not a super cop. You don't have carte blanche authority to do whatever you want, but it's as circumscribed or set by statute or by the Constitution at times. So there are some of the duties and responsibilities of the Attorney General that I'll try to touch briefly on. But to me, a lot of what the Attorney General can and should do, it's not a highly partisan job. You're hiring the state's lawyer, and you're hiring the individual that's going to run the state's law firm. But a big chunk of what I see of this job is really kind of what I think a lot of you do in your daily basis too, is what kind of Montana do we want? What kind of place do we want to live? What kind of place do we want to pass on to our kids or our grandkids? And to me, that sort of is what runs it. Will Montana's kids, will they be safe in their homes, playgrounds, that new playground, the internet? Will they be able to fish and hike on the paths that I did? I guess I'll get into the background, but my elementary school was just across the street And when I think of kind of the idyllic of what my childhood was, it may not have always been idyllic, but what kind of Montana are we going to give to our next generation? And will your local law enforcement have what they need to be safe? Will our farmers and ranchers, through antitrust and consumer protection, be able to get fair prices for their goods? I think there's so much that this office can do. And what we're really doing here, what the candidates will be asking of you, what I'm asking of you, is you're hiring them. And you're about to hire the lawyer for the state of Montana. And I hope that ultimately what you do when you do that is just like you're going to hire an employee. You take a look at what's their background. What experiences do they bring into that office? What's their vision or understanding of this actual office? Is it of the office, or is it of things completely divested of the office? And what are the values and things they'll bring into that office? What's their plan and vision for that? I haven't told you much about my background, so I'll give a brief overview on that. As I said, I was raised here in Helena. My parents divorced early in, I guess, grade school, and was raised largely by my mother. Ended up going to college at a place called Claremont McKenna College. It's outside of Los Angeles. Never saw the place before showing up for the first day. We certainly couldn't afford the plane trip down even. Worked a couple jobs each semester, and ended up graduating from Claremont in 1988. A few years later, I put myself through law school at Columbia Law School in New York, graduated in 1994. My work experience has been split largely between the private sector and the government sectors. My public practice, I guess, I think is what is most directly relevant to the job that I'm seeking. And that's been split. I started out, I was chief legal counsel to Secretary of State Mike Cooney for about a year, so I definitely dealt with some corporate formation. But then moved over to the Attorney General's office, and I spent 4 years in the Attorney General's office. First as Executive Assistant Attorney General, then finishing up as Chief Deputy, Acting Chief Deputy Attorney General. So when we talk about the core functions of what the Attorney General does, well, the Attorney General handles all criminal appeals for the state. I wrote some of those appeals. The Attorney General works with local law enforcement to see what needs are in your communities. I ran our legislative program for a number of years, or for, I guess, 2 sessions, and sat at the table as we crafted legislation. The Attorney General does civil work, defending lawsuits brought against the state. And I had the opportunity to do civil work there, write Attorney General opinions as well. So this is a 7-division department, from the highway patrol to gambling control to regulation of charitable trusts and nonprofits, to motor vehicle division, to the legal services, to division of criminal investigation. One of the great things about my opportunity while I was there is I had the chance to work in those areas. So I think I understand what the job is and what the job could ultimately be. My private practice has been split. In part, I spent a few years out in Washington, D.C., paying off those student loans that I seemed to acquire when I went to law school, and teaching also at George Washington University Law School. And that was a great experience, I think, for what I want to do here also. Because when Canyon Resources, as an example, sues the state of Montana, or when a large corporation sues the state of Montana, typically when those suits are in the lots of zeros behind them, you end up hiring the same sort of firms that I work for. So it was a great boot camp, a great opportunity that I think really ground my practice as a lawyer. Not necessarily as a policymaker, which is good because that's not all the Attorney General does, but as a lawyer. For the last 5 years, I've been in private practice in Helena, 4.5 years, and I think that a lot of the values that